scary stories.
Every night, I share a story that most people wouldn't dare to tell. If you're listening, you're already one of us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, that's okay. But just know, every new subscriber brings me one step closer to building a safe place for the one person I love most, my mother. So if you enjoy these haunted tales, press that button, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be the reason the next story finds a happier ending. Elizabeth Jackson stared at her reflection one last time before stepping out. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A little celebration with Lily, her best friend since college. Elizabeth had finally gotten a small promotion at work, and though it wasn't life-changing, it was enough to raise a glass. The night air was sharp, slicing against her bare arms as she stepped into the street, heels clicking faintly on the wet pavement. The town was small, sleepy most days, but Friday nights still breathed some life into it. "Elizabeth, over here," Lily called, waving from a booth at the edge of the dimly lit bar. Elizabeth smiled and hurried inside, letting the door close behind her with a low groan. The bar smelled of spilled beer, cheap perfume, and something else she couldn't place. Something sour, almost rotten. She ignored it. The place was packed, music low and thudding in the walls. They ordered drinks, bright cocktails with ridiculous umbrellas, and laughed over silly office gossip, completely unaware that, in the dark corner of the bar, a man watched them. Elizabeth first noticed him when she dropped her phone and bent to pick it up. When she straightened, there he was, standing at the bar, an apron tied loosely around his waist, as if he had just stepped out of a kitchen. Weird, she thought. But he smiled, warm and open, lifting a glass slightly in a quiet toast. Elizabeth gave a polite nod back, then turned her attention to Lily. "Do you know him?" Lily shrugged. "Nope. Looks harmless, though." Minutes later, the bartender placed a fresh drink in front of Elizabeth. "From the gentleman at the bar," he said. Elizabeth hesitated. Lily giggled. "It's just a drink, Em. Live a little." The drink shimmered deep red under the lights, almost mesmerizing. Elizabeth smiled cautiously toward the man, Mr. Harold Griggs, though she didn't know his name yet, and lifted the glass to her lips. The first sip was bitter, unpleasant, different, but she didn't want to seem rude. She drank. The night became a blur after that. Colors smeared into each other. Voices drifted like smoke. Elizabeth remembered flashes, Lily laughing, her own legs feeling too heavy, the floor tilting. She remembered the stranger approaching, taking her arm so gently, whispering something she couldn't understand. The last thing she saw before blackness swallowed her was the man's apron. There were stains on it. Dark, brown stains. Her head pounded mercilessly. Elizabeth's mouth was dry, tongue thick and uncooperative. She tried to move, and that's when the terror slammed into her chest. Her arms were bound to a wooden chair, wrists tied tight with rough, scratchy rope. Her legs, too, were strapped to the chair's legs. Panic flared, hot and suffocating. She was in a room. No windows, only one dim yellow bulb swinging overhead. In the corner, someone whistled tunelessly. Elizabeth turned her head. It hurt, and saw him, the man from the bar, wearing the same apron, now even dirtier. He stood at an old kitchen counter, chopping something. Chop, chop, chop. The smell of cooking meat filled the air, thick and nauseating. "You're awake. Wonderful," the man said cheerfully, his voice light and sing-song. Elizabeth struggled against the ropes, heart hammering. The man wiped his hands on his apron and approached her, carrying a tray. "My name's Harold," he said brightly. "But you can call me Chef Griggs. Welcome to my kitchen." Elizabeth tried to scream, but her throat only croaked. Chef Griggs set the tray on a small table beside her. On it was a plate of spaghetti, thick noodles coated in a deep red sauce, steam rising lazily. I made it just for you, he said. Elizabeth turned her face away, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, 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 Griggs tisked, lifting a fork. You must. Try it. You'll love it, I swear. To prove it, he took a forkful himself, exaggeratedly tasting it. His eyes rolled back as he moaned in fake delight. Elizabeth gagged. Something about the sauce, the smell, the color, made her stomach churn violently. She tried to pull free again, wrists burning, but the knots were too tight. Griggs crouched beside her, smiling gently like a father soothing a crying child. I know you're scared. First-timers always are. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering a second too long. Elizabeth flinched. But you'll see, he continued, standing. This is a place of celebration, like a special restaurant. You've been chosen for my masterpiece menu. The way he said it, with such pride, made Elizabeth's skin crawl. She looked around frantically. The walls were lined with knives, cleavers, pots, and pans, all meticulously organized. Every surface gleamed with a cleanliness that felt wrong, sterile, like a morgue. Elizabeth's mind raced. Was anyone looking for her? Would Lily realize something was wrong? Would Daniel? Her brother had always been so protective. Her heart sank. If Harold had taken her from the bar, who knew where she was now? Griggs paced back to the stove, stirring something thick and bubbling in a huge pot. He whistled as he worked, glancing at her every few minutes. Elizabeth tested the ropes again. There was slight give near her right ankle. Barely noticeable, but there, she filed the information away. Griggs returned, beaming. Now, darling, you must try it. Just a bite. Please. It's rude not to appreciate your host's effort, he said with mock sternness. Elizabeth pressed her lips tightly together. Griggs sighed and leaned closer, his face suddenly devoid of the cheerful mask. Eat, he whispered. The room seemed to contract around her. Tears blurred Elizabeth's vision as she took the fork with trembling fingers, bringing a small bite of spaghetti to her mouth. The smell was overwhelming, metallic, almost coppery, as the noodles touched her lips. She gagged and dropped the fork, retching onto the floor. Griggs stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he laughed, a bright, musical sound that chilled Elizabeth to her bones. Well, he said, wiping his hands on his apron. Maybe you need a little more seasoning. Griggs dragged the tray away, humming a tune Elizabeth didn't recognize. It sounded like a lullaby, but distorted, off-key. Elizabeth worked at the rope, near her ankle, her fingers slipping on the rough fibers. Every sound made her flinch. The scraping of a knife, the bubbling of the pot, Griggs's soft humming. She had to get out. She had to. Otherwise, she realized with a horrible sinking certainty, she wasn't going to be just a guest here. She was going to be the main course. Elizabeth's hands ached, raw from struggling against the coarse rope. Sweat trickled down her forehead, stinging her eyes. The right ankle. It was her only hope. The knot there was loosening, but so slowly it felt like time was mocking her. The kitchen was filled with the sound of bubbling broth and Harold Griggs's humming. Still that eerie, broken lullaby. She glanced again at the pot on the stove. Thick, oily red liquid simmered, occasionally releasing a sickly sweet smell into the air. Something floated up and disappeared beneath the surface again. Elizabeth's stomach twisted. Was that a bone? Griggs turned suddenly, catching her staring. Curious. Are we? He sang, stepping closer. His shoes squeaked slightly on the tiled floor, a tiny sound that somehow made her heart thud louder. He lifted the lid off the pot and scooped something out with a ladle, holding it proudly. It was a small, human-looking hand. Elizabeth gagged violently, tears burning her eyes. Griggs laughed, delighted. "Don't worry, sweetheart. That's not for you. You get the fresh cuts." Later, Griggs set down a leather-bound book in front of her, opening it with a dramatic flourish. The menu was handwritten, scribbled in messy cursive. Starter, fresh garden salad, with special additions. Main course, choice cuts over homemade pasta. Dessert, sweetbread. Delight Elizabeth's mind barely processed the words. Her eyes caught on little details, drawings of knives, measurements, chilling notes like age matters, and fear flavors the meat. Griggs watched her with a dreamy smile. "I take pride in my work," he said softly. "Real chefs, they respect the ingredient." Elizabeth stared at him, her breathing shallow. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't even a prisoner. She was an ingredient. That night, or what she guessed was night, Elizabeth sat shivering against the ropes while Griggs moved around prepping more dishes. Somewhere deep in the house she heard it, a muffled sound. A voice? She froze, heart pounding. Someone else was here. Another prisoner? Or something worse? The thudding sound came again, a soft, wet, dragging noise. Griggs didn't react, as if he was used to it. Elizabeth craned her neck, trying to see past the kitchen doorway, but the darkness beyond was impenetrable. Suddenly, a shadow moved. Large and lurching, Elizabeth gasped. Griggs chuckled without turning around. "Oh, don't mind the others. They're leftovers." Griggs spent the next few hours, or maybe it was minutes, time lost all meaning, telling Elizabeth stories. Stories about his restaurant, a secret place he once ran deep in the mountains before he was forced to relocate. About customers who never left. About dishes so perfect they made grown men weep before they died. Each story was worse than the last. Each one dripped with a horrifying love for his craft. Elizabeth tuned him out as best she could, focusing on the loosened rope at her ankle. She twisted, inch by painful inch, biting down screams when the rope scraped skin raw. Later, Griggs set up a small bedroll in the corner for himself, turning off the kitchen lights. The room plunged into darkness, except for the dim glow from the stove. Elizabeth's breathing was loud in her ears. Slowly, silently, she worked her foot free. When it slipped loose, she almost cried aloud. Carefully, she began to slide her foot across the floor, reaching toward a metal stool nearby. If she could tip it over, maybe she could use the edge to cut the ropes around her wrists. Her toes brushed it. Almost there. Creak. Griggs stirred in the corner, mumbling in his sleep. Elizabeth froze, every muscle screaming with tension. A long minute passed. Silence. She moved again, slower this time. The stool tilted, wobbled. Finally, with a soft clatter, it fell. Griggs didn't wake. Elizabeth worked frantically, sawing the rope against the sharp corner of the stool. She was almost free when a low growl echoed from the darkness beyond the kitchen. Elizabeth froze. Another growl, closer this time. Something was moving out there. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Griggs sat up suddenly, eyes wide and alert in the dim light. "Stay still," he hissed. "Don't move." For the first time, Elizabeth saw fear on his face. From the shadows at the edge of the room, something enormous and broken shambled into view. It was human once, maybe, but now it was a stitched-together horror. Twisted limbs, hollow, rotting. Eyes, mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. Elizabeth recoiled in horror. Griggs stood up, hands raised. "It's all right, baby," he crooned. "Dinner's almost ready. You'll have your share soon." The creature growled again, low and wet. It sniffed the air and turned toward Elizabeth. Griggs lunged between them. "No, not yet. She's not ready." Elizabeth's heart exploded in terror. She saw her chance. With a final desperate pull, the rope snapped. She was free. Without thinking, Elizabeth bolted from the chair, sprinting across the kitchen. Griggs screamed behind her, a sound full of rage and panic. The monster howled, a horrible gurgling noise that shook the walls. Elizabeth ran into the blackness beyond the kitchen, crashing into walls, stumbling over debris. Behind her, footsteps thundered, Griggs chasing her, and something heavier, dragging itself after her. The house was a maze. Endless halls, doors leading to rooms filled with horrors she barely glimpsed. Jars full of floating organs, freezers packed with frozen limbs, bones stacked like firewood. She ran blindly, heart clawing at her ribs. Somewhere, she had to find a way out. She had to. Before Griggs caught her, or worse. Before the thing in the dark did. Elizabeth's bare feet slapped against cold, sticky floors. Her lungs burned, and her throat was raw from breathing so hard. Behind her, the wet, dragging sounds grew louder. The stitched creature was still coming, and Harold Griggs, screaming her name like a lunatic conductor rallying his symphony of nightmares. "Elizabetha, come back, sweetheart. You're not done yet." She stumbled through another doorway and slammed it shut, twisting the lock. Darkness swallowed her. Panting, she leaned against the wall, trying to listen. Silence. And then, a faint, horrible sound. Whispering. Dozens of tiny voices just behind the walls. Elizabeth whimpered, clutching her arms to her chest. The walls, they were moving. No, not moving. Breathing. She crept forward in the dark, her hands brushing against something cold. A switch. The dim, flickering light revealed she was standing in a long hallway lined with paintings. Portraits. Men, women, children, all painted in brilliant, painful detail. Their faces distorted in terror, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Elizabeth shuddered. As she moved past them, she realized with horror, the eyes of the paintings followed her. Not metaphorically, actually moved. A tiny, raspy voice escaped one. "Help us!" Elizabeth stumbled, back, tripping over something soft. She looked down. It was a hand, severed cleanly at the wrist. Stuffed into the hand was a note, scrawled in bloody letters. The kitchen was mercy. The cellar is death. A door at the end of the hall was ajar, swinging gently. Elizabeth pushed it open and gagged at the smell. The room was massive, like an abandoned ballroom. But the floor was littered with cages, and inside the cages were people, or what remained of them. Some were skeletal, their skin clinging to bones. Some were missing limbs. Some just whimpered in the dark, too broken to speak. One girl, no older than 14, looked at Elizabeth with glassy eyes and whispered, "Don't let him cook you." Elizabeth knelt by the cage, her heart breaking. "How do I get out?" she whispered. The girl smiled, a broken, bleeding smile. "You don't. You..." Elizabeth moved on, heart hammering. Another door, another nightmare. This room was Griggs's workshop, filled with butcher's tools, blood-stained aprons, jars of preserved ingredients. On one table lay a body, half dismembered, half stitched, back together like a grotesque experiment. Above it, written in dripping red paint, "If they don't eat, they rot." Elizabeth sobbed, clutching her mouth. In the corner, a record player began to spin by itself, playing a broken, scratchy waltz. From the shadows beyond the room she heard Griggs's voice, calm and sweet. "Darling, I worked so hard for you." She bolted again, finding a spiral staircase leading down. The steps creaked under her weight, and every creak seemed deafening. The lower she went, the colder it became. The smell of rot grew stronger. At the bottom, a door. Heavy. Iron. Bolted from the outside. She turned the bolt and pushed. A blast of cold, fetid air hit her. Beyond the door was the cellar, pitch black, except for one flickering light bulb swinging from the ceiling. The room was vast. In the center, a massive dining table set for dozens, plates, goblets, silverware, and at the head of the table, an empty throne made of bones. As she stepped into the room, the whispers returned. Louder this time. Urgent. Elizabeth stumbled toward the table. On every plate was a different dish, but all were grotesque. A severed hand served, with roasted vegetables, a soup filled with teeth, a cake decorated with human eyes like cherries. Elizabeth gagged, backing away. Suddenly, the light bulb above sparked, and the stitched creature stepped into the room behind her, dragging a chain from its wrist. Its hollow eyes locked onto her. A long, low growl echoed off the stone walls. Griggs's voice floated down the stairs. "Dinner is served, my love." The stitched creature lunged. Elizabeth ducked, screaming, as the creature's hands swiped inches from her face. She ran around the table, grabbing a broken chair leg as a weapon. The creature moved fast for its size, knocking chairs aside like toys. It roared, a wet, animalistic sound that filled the cellar. Elizabeth swung the chair leg wildly, managing to strike it across the face. It staggered back. Momentarily dazed, Elizabeth seized the chance, bolting for a second door she spotted along the far wall. She yanked it open and plunged through, slamming it behind her. She didn't care where it led. Anywhere was better than here. The door led to a tunnel, narrow, crumbling, barely wide enough to crawl through. Elizabeth squeezed in, scraping her arms and legs against the rough stone. Behind her, she heard Griggs shouting, furious now, "You ungrateful little bitch! I made you a feast!" The stitched creature howled in rage. Elizabeth crawled faster. The tunnel curved and twisted, descending even deeper. Water dripped from the ceiling. The walls pulsed with a strange, sickly glow. Ahead, she saw light, a soft blue flicker. A way out, or another trap. She didn't care. She had no choice but to keep going. The tunnel opened into a cavern. In the center of the cavern was a pit, wide and deep. Chains dangled over it like spider webs. And inside the pit, something moved. Something vast and many-limbed, writhing in the shadows. Elizabeth backed away, heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, footsteps approached, fast, angry, Griggs, and he wasn't alone. More stitched horrors stumbled into the cavern after him. Dozens of them. Griggs smiled. At her, a terrible broken thing. "Welcome to the family, Elizabeth." And he lunged. Elizabeth had no choice. As Griggs lunged, she sprinted toward the pit. Chains swung wildly overhead, slick with blood and grease. Elizabeth grabbed one, wrapping it tight around her wrists, and swung herself over the abyss. Griggs screamed in rage, reaching for her, but missed. She dangled over the pit, her feet kicking in open air. Below her, in the swirling darkness, something monstrous shifted, a grotesque tangle of limbs and faces. Victims melted together, groaning and twitching. As one. Elizabeth gagged, bile rising in her throat. The chain creaked dangerously. If it snapped, she'd fall straight into that. Hand over hand, Elizabeth began pulling herself along the chain, trying to reach the far side of the pit. Below her, the fused creature moaned, a wet, sucking sound that made her skin crawl. The stitched horrors at the pit's edge jabbered and clawed at the air, desperate to reach her. One threw a rock. It missed by inches. Sweat poured down Elizabeth's face. Her muscles burned. Halfway across, the chain jerked, pulled taut. Elizabeth screamed. Something below her had grabbed it. Looking down, she saw dozens of hands reaching upward, grabbing for her dangling feet. Fingers grazed her ankle. With a desperate scream, she swung forward, lurching toward a ledge just beyond the pit. She hit the rock wall hard, nearly losing her grip. But somehow, she clung on. Elizabeth hauled herself up and collapsed, gasping. Ahead of her stretched a labyrinth, endless twisting corridors carved from wet, black stone. The air smelled of mold, death, and something worse, hopelessness. Behind her, Griggs roared in frustration, but he didn't follow. Not yet. Elizabeth forced herself to her feet and staggered into the labyrinth. Every wall was slick to the touch. The tunnels forked and twisted unpredictably, each passage looking exactly like the last. Worse still, the whispers followed her. Soft. Begging, accusing. Why didn't you save us? You ate with him. You're already one of us. Elizabeth covered her ears, sobbing. But the voices were inside her head now. As she stumbled through the endless halls, she began seeing things. Her friends, the ones from the night she was abducted, standing in side corridors calling to her. Elizabeth, over here. We found a way out. Don't be afraid, Elizabeth cried out, running toward them, only to have them vanish at the last second, leaving her clawing at empty air. She was losing her mind. The labyrinth wanted her. At every turn, she caught glimpses of herself in the black stone. Reflections that moved independently, smiling when she cried, laughing when she screamed. At one point, she thought she saw her own body stitched into the wall, her mouth sewn shut, her eyes pleading. Elizabeth, it mouthed silently. She ran, faster and faster, not caring where. The labyrinth eventually opened into a massive underground dining hall, far older than the house above. Ancient stone pillars held up a vaulted ceiling, and in the center was a long banquet table, covered in dust and rot. But at the table sat figures, hundreds of them, dressed in tattered finery, faces hidden behind crumbling masks. As Elizabeth crept closer, she realized they were corpses, dried out, preserved somehow, like human jerky. Every one of them held a goblet in their skeletal hands, and as she watched in horror, the goblets raised themselves to the corpses' mouths, an invisible toast, the air filled with the clinking of bone against silver. Elizabeth backed away, straight into a pair of arms. Elizabeth screamed and lashed out, breaking free. Behind her, the banquet guests were rising from their chairs, slowly, creaking, groaning. The skeletal figures shuffled toward her, arms outstretched. Elizabeth bolted across the hall, weaving between them. But the dead were everywhere, now, crowding the aisles, blocking the exits. She spotted a staircase leading upward at the far end of the room, a thin spiral barely wide enough for one person. Without thinking, she sprinted for it. Dead hands clawed at her clothes, scraping, her skin tearing at her hair. A goblet smashed against the wall beside her, spilling black, tar-like liquid that hissed where it touched stone. Elizabeth reached the stairs and began to climb. Up, 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 her legs screaming in protest. At the top of the staircase, she found herself back in the house, or what remained of it. The walls were rotting, the floors buckled, the whole structure seemed alive, pulsating, groaning, bleeding, and Griggs was waiting. standing at the end of the hall, smiling that sick, childlike smile. Behind him, the stitched horrors lined, up like soldiers. "You made it back!" he crowed, clapping his hands. "I'm so proud of you, Elizabeth. You've earned your place." Elizabeth raised her fists, ready to fight. Griggs laughed. "No, no, my dear. Not a fight." He gestured behind him. The final feast. And, with a crash, the stitched horrors surged forward. Elizabeth turned and fled, sprinting through the decaying house. Doors led to nowhere. Hallways twisted impossibly, folding in on themselves. Sometimes she ended up back where she started without, understanding how. The house was eating itself, and her with it. Rooms collapsed. Floors gave way, the walls bled thick, black ichor that sizzled and steamed where it dripped. She realized the truth then. There was no outside, no exit. The house was a living thing, a trap, and she was its prey. And Griggs? He wasn't just a man. He was part of it, or maybe it was part of him. She was trapped in his world now. Forever. Unless she did the unthinkable. Elizabeth ran. Her heart battered her ribs, like a drum. Her bare feet slipped on the blood-slick floors as she sprinted through the twisted house. But no matter where she turned, Griggs's laughter echoed from the walls. "Elizabeth, come back. The meal is ready." His voice was high, playful, like a child calling a playmate. Rooms folded in on themselves. Corridors stretched impossibly long, then snapped back like rubber bands. Elizabeth realized with dawning horror. She wasn't running through the house anymore. She was running inside something alive, and it was guiding her somewhere. Finally, Elizabeth burst through a grand double door and froze. It was a dining room. An enormous table stretched the length of the hall, piled high with steaming dishes. Roast meats, glazed vegetables, mountains of glistening pasta. It smelled heavenly, wrongly heavenly, clashing violently with the stink of rot and death. Seated at the table were the stitched horrors, dressed in tattered finery. Their eyes were sewn shut, their mouths stitched into grotesque smiles, and at the head of the table, Griggs, wearing a chef's hat, beaming. "Come, Elizabeth," he cried. "Your seat is waiting." A single chair sat empty across from him. Silverware laid neatly beside a steaming plate of spaghetti. The same spaghetti from the basement. The same smell that had made her gag before. Elizabeth didn't move. Griggs's smile faltered slightly. "You must eat," he said. "It's the only way." His voice lost some of its childishness. There was an edge to it now, something sharp and cold. Elizabeth took a shaky step backward. Griggs stood slowly, the stitched horrors rising with him. "You eat," he said softly, "or you become part of the feast." He gestured to the walls. Elizabeth looked and screamed. The walls were lined with faces, embedded in the wood, their mouths gaping in silent agony, eyes wide and pleading. Some she recognized, her friends, her family, strangers she had never met, all trapped here, all part of the house. Griggs approached, carrying the plate of spaghetti. Steam curled from it, thick and sweet. He set it down gently in front of Elizabeth and whispered, "Just one bite." Elizabeth's stomach churned. Her mind screamed at her to refuse, to fight, to run. But she remembered the pit, the stitched horrors, the banquet of the dead. There was no way out. Griggs knelt beside her chair, his head cocked like a curious bird. "If you eat," he said, "you belong to me, but you live. If you don't." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The walls whispered the rest. Elizabeth picked up the fork. Her hand trembled so badly she could barely hold it. Griggs beamed. The stitched horrors clapped their mangled hands together in a grotesque applause. Elizabeth twirled a forkful of spaghetti. It looked normal. It even smelled good. But as she lifted it toward her mouth, she saw, nestled among the noodles, a human finger, boiled pale, the nail cracked and peeling. Elizabeth gagged, dropping the fork. Griggs's smile slipped into a snarl. "You're wasting food," he hissed. The stitched horrors began to move, slowly, lurching toward her, their sewn faces twisted with hunger. Elizabeth had seconds to decide. Elizabeth grabbed the fork again, her mind shattered into pieces, some screaming to stop, others numb with terror. She closed her eyes and took a bite. The spaghetti was sweet, too sweet. The texture was all wrong, gummy, slimy, alive. Elizabeth gagged but forced it down. Griggs clapped his hands joyfully. "Wonderful. Marvelous. You'll fit in beautifully." The stitched horrors stopped moving. The walls seemed to sigh in relief. Elizabeth slumped in the chair, tears streaming down her face. She had survived, but she had lost something deeper. Something she could never get back. Her soul, maybe. Her humanity. Almost immediately, Elizabeth felt it. A burning in her stomach. A coldness spreading through her veins. Her fingers stiffened. She looked down. Her skin was graying. Her veins darkening. The seat beneath her began to absorb her. Thick vines and tendrils curling around her legs, fusing with her skin. Elizabeth screamed, but it came out choked and broken. Griggs knelt beside her again, whispering sweetly, "You're part of the house now, my dear. Welcome home." Her vision blurred. Around her, the stitched horrors smiled wider. Somewhere far away, the house rumbled in pleasure. And Elizabeth realized she had escaped one death, only to be trapped in something much worse, forever. Elizabeth drifted in blackness. There was no light, no sound, only the crushing weight of the house pressing against her soul. When her eyes fluttered open, she was still at the table, still bound to the chair. But the room had changed. It was empty now. The stitched horrors were gone. The food was rotted and crawling with maggots. Griggs was nowhere in sight. Elizabeth struggled weakly. The vines had grown through her arms, her legs, her spine. Every movement sent a jolt of burning agony through her body. She wasn't human anymore. She was becoming furniture, a part of the house's endless feast. At first, she thought she was hallucinating. A whisper, faint and broken, slithered through. "The walls! Elizabeth!" She turned her head painfully. Faces, hundreds of them, pushed against the wooden walls, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. "Help us! Don't let him win! Escape!" Elizabeth's heart, weak and ragged, fluttered with a tiny spark of hope. She wasn't the first, and maybe, somehow, she could be the last. But how? She was more vine than flesh now. Her mind raced through the fog of pain. Somewhere deep inside, she found it, the will to fight. The double doors creaked open. Griggs entered, whistling a merry tune, but he wasn't alone. He dragged someone behind him, a young girl, no older than 16, unconscious, her wrists bound. Griggs dumped her onto the rotten table with a thud. Then he turned to Elizabeth. "She's the next course," he said cheerfully. "But first, you must help me prepare her." He tossed a butcher knife onto Elizabeth's plate. Elizabeth recoiled in horror. "You can either stay trapped forever," Griggs said, his voice low and threatening, "or you can serve." prove your loyalty. The choice was clear and impossible. Elizabeth's shaking hand hovered over the knife. The vines tightened around her body, hissing in her ears. Griggs watched her eagerly, drool collecting at the corners of his mouth. "Kill her," the walls whispered, "or stay forever." Elizabeth squeezed her eyes shut. Tears streamed down her face. She picked up the knife. Griggs clapped like an excited child. Elizabeth raised the blade over the unconscious girl. Her heart shattered into a million splintered pieces. She screamed, a raw, broken scream, and drove the knife downward, but not into the girl, into herself, straight into her own chest. The house shrieked, the walls cracked, the stitched horrors burst into flame, their sewn mouths gaping in surprise. Griggs staggered backward, his face contorted in rage and disbelief. "No!" he roared. Elizabeth's body, half human, half house, crumbled into ash, and with her final breath, she whispered, "I'm not yours." The house convulsed, vomiting out years of horror, blood, bones, and trapped souls. Griggs howled as the floor beneath him split open, revealing a black abyss. The girl's eyes fluttered open just in time to see him fall, screaming, into the endless dark. The house collapsed. Screams echoed into nothingness as the twisted structure folded in on itself. When silence finally fell, only the girl remained, bruised, terrified, but alive. She stumbled out into the cold dawn, gasping in the fresh air. Behind her, the ground where the house once stood was barren and scorched, as if it had never existed at all. The girl turned, one last time, whispering a soft, broken thank you into the wind. And somewhere, carried by the breeze, she thought she heard a voice whisper back, "You're free." The rain hit the windshield in frantic, uneven patterns as Ethan Cole tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The world beyond his headlights had dissolved into a soup of black mist and endless trees. His GPS had died miles ago, and the last road sign he saw, "Welcome to Devil's Point," had leaned crookedly into the fog, half swallowed by creeping vines. Hell of a name for a fresh start, Ethan muttered to himself. The scars from the city, from the inferno that had taken his partner and nearly ended his own life, still burned beneath his skin. Devil's Point was supposed to be a quiet place, a way to heal, to forget. Instead, the town had greeted him with darkness. He pulled into the firehouse's cracked parking lot, the tires crunching on loose gravel. The building loomed against the full storm, ancient brick and ironwork soaked by rain. A single light flickered weakly above the door, buzzing like an angry wasp. Ethan stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into mud. The air smelled of wet ash and something older, rotting, like a place that hadn't been truly alive in decades. He pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The firehouse's interior felt frozen in time. Framed black and white photographs lined the walls. Firefighters with haunted eyes stared down at him. A fireplace crackled weakly at the far end of the main hall, casting distorted shadows. A group of elderly men sat around a battered oak table, nursing cups of black coffee. They turned to look at Ethan, their faces lined with deep wrinkles, eyes as dull and flat as river stones. At the head of the table sat a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and a badge that read, Chief Walter Briggs. "You must be Cole," Briggs said, his voice low and rasping. "We weren't expecting you till morning." "Storm drove me in early," Ethan said, setting down his duffel bag. "Hope that's not a problem." Briggs stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment, then slowly shook his head. "Nothing here happens by accident." He rose to his feet with a grunt, walking over to a dusty filing cabinet. From it, He pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. He handed it to Ethan. "Rules," Briggs said. "You break 'em, you pay." Ethan blinked, a small chuckle escaping his lips. Is this some kind of town tradition? The men around the table didn't laugh. "Learn 'em," Briggs said, his face hardening, "or you won't last a week." The first night in Devil's Point Firehouse was merciless. The ancient pipes groaned behind the walls. The wind howled like a living creature, clawing at the windows Ethan had been warned not to look through. He slept in fitful bursts, his dreams filled with the crackling sound of fire and distant voices murmuring in a language he couldn't understand. When he awoke near dawn, the firehouse was shrouded in an unnatural silence. No morning bustle, no clatter of coffee mugs. Only the low, almost imperceptible hum of something unseen, vibrating through the very bones of the building. The radio on the nightstand crackled to life, hissing static. Ethan sat bolt upright. "Station 9, do you copy? Child. Woods. Fire. Trapped." The transmission garbled and twisted. Without hesitation, training taking over, Ethan suited up. He glanced at the clock. 4:13 a.m. He remembered the rule. Always answer the radio, even if you don't recognize the voice. He snatched up the receiver. "Station 9, Cole responding. "What's the child's location?" The voice came back, weak and broken, barely audible over a rising shriek of interference. "North Woods. Ash Hollow. Burning. Please hurry." Then silence. Ethan rushed to the engine bay. The older men were already there, standing motionless, watching him, their faces blank, drained of emotion. "You heard that, right?" Ethan said, shoving his arms into his turnout coat. Chief Briggs shook his head, slow and deliberate. "You didn't get a call, son. But the radio, you didn't get a call," Briggs repeated, his voice heavy with warning. "Not unless you want to meet what's waiting out there." Ethan hesitated. His training screamed at him. Child in danger. Char's immediate response. But the old men only watched him silently, their silence thicker than the fog outside. "If it were your kid, you'd want someone to come," Ethan thought grimly. He grabbed the keys to the fire engine. As he climbed into the truck, he could have sworn he saw, out of the corner of his eye, Briggs making the sign of the cross. Driving through Devil's Point at night was like driving through the mouth of something huge and breathing. The headlights carved tunnels through the fog. Twisted trees leaned toward the road, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. Ethan found Ash Hollow easily enough, an old, barely visible dirt path branching off into the woods. The deeper he went, the less the truck's lights seemed to matter. The darkness closed in, almost tactile. Suddenly, orange flicker ahead. Flames. He floored the gas. At the edge of a clearing, he slammed the brakes. A small cottage stood engulfed in fire. Black smoke poured upward like grasping hands. The structure looked ancient, almost medieval, as if it had been abandoned for a century. Standing just outside the front door was a child. A boy, maybe 6 or 7, barefoot, dirty, staring, straight at Ethan. "Hang on, buddy," Ethan shouted, leaping from the cab. But as he ran forward, the fire shifted, and something moved within the flames. It wasn't the boy. It was something else. At first, Ethan thought it was just smoke and heat, but the shape grew clearer. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs and a featureless face, its body rippling like molten wax. It stepped from the burning cottage without being touched by the flames, and it was reaching for the boy. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to stop, to run, but he pushed forward, snatching the boy into his arms. The boy's skin was ice cold. He didn't struggle. He didn't cry. The entity's fingers brushed Ethan's turnout gear, and he felt a shock like electricity jolt through him. It whispered in his mind, "He belongs to us." Ethan sprinted for the truck. As he fled, he didn't dare look back. But he heard it. A shriek, impossibly loud, not from any human throat, and a deep, grinding voice that seemed to echo from the trees themselves. The fire never ends. Back at the truck, Ethan threw the boy into the passenger seat and roared back down the dirt road. The woods seemed to close behind them, the darkness folding in tighter and tighter. He risked a glance at the boy. The kid just stared at him, wide-eyed, expressionless. His lips moved silently. Ethan leaned closer. The boy was whispering the rules. The exact rules from the firehouse sheet, over and over and over. When they finally pulled back into the firehouse lot, dawn was bleeding pale light into the sky. Chief Briggs stood on the steps, arms crossed. The old men behind him looked grim. Ethan stumbled out of the truck, still clutching the boy. "I got him out," Ethan gasped. There was something in the fire. It tried to... Briggs didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for two of the old men to come forward. They took the boy gently from Ethan's arms. "You shouldn't have gone," Briggs said quietly. "You broke the rule." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw it. Down the boy's back, beneath the rags of his shirt, burned into his flesh, were symbols. Curling black marks, almost like brands. The boy's eyes locked with Ethan's one last time, and he smiled. It was not a child's smile. It was something older, something hungry. That night, as Ethan lay awake in his bunk, listening to the endless creaks and groans of the firehouse, he realized something. He hadn't rescued a boy. He had invited something in, and in Devil's Point, once something was invited, it never left. Outside his window, just beyond the glass, something scratched softly at the panes. A child's voice whispered, "Never look out the windows after dark." Ethan's first thought when he woke up was simple. I shouldn't have come here. But there was no escaping it now. The events of the previous night felt like a nightmare. But as the clock ticked closer to the start of his shift, the realization settled in like the weight of a lead blanket. The boy, or whatever it was, had haunted his mind all night. Those chilling words, "He belongs to us." The firehouse was still dark when Ethan made his way downstairs. The dim light of dawn barely cut through the fog outside. The old men, as usual, were already up, sitting in their respective chairs, sipping their coffee and watching the door as if they were waiting for him. "How's the boy?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. Briggs didn't look up. "He's fine. He's always fine." Ethan frowned but said nothing more. There was something wrong about how the chief spoke, something detached, like he wasn't talking about a child, or even a human. Instead of a typical comforting breakfast, the firehouse smelled of something heavier, darker. The old men didn't speak much, their conversations reduced to murmurs, their eyes always watching. As the day wore on, Ethan became more aware of the strange undercurrents in the air. The rules of the firehouse had become more than just guidelines. They felt like shackles. Every fire is a gift, but only if we follow the rules. He couldn't shake the feeling that every rule had a deeper, more sinister meaning. The first of the month. Never looking outside after dark. Always starting a fire when you wake up. As the day passed, the strange, jittery feeling in his gut kept gnawing at him. He realized that in a small, rural town like Devil's Point, fires didn't just destroy, they claimed. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ethan was alone in the station. The others had gone to bed early, like they did every night, as if they were preparing for something. The radio crackled to life again, the hissing static seeping through the old, battered device. "Station 9, do you copy? We've got a fire. much bigger than usual. It's moving through the woods. The voice cut out. Ethan grabbed the receiver. "This is Ethan Cole. Come in. Over." But the radio was silent. Then, a cold, distorted laugh echoed through the static. It was haunting, like the voice came from somewhere deep inside the earth itself. It was a laugh of something horribly ancient. His hand trembled as he turned the radio off. This wasn't just a fire station. There was something else here, something older. The next call came only an hour later. A small fire had broken out near the edge of the town. This time the transmission was clear. No distortion, no strange laughter. "Ethan, you're the only one up. Go." It was Briggs's voice, but it sounded wrong, as if it had been dragged through the air. "On my way," Ethan replied, his stomach twisting. When he arrived at the fire, the sight was more horrifying than any blaze he had ever seen. The flames were a sickly green, casting an eerie glow over the trees. The fire seemed to move unnaturally, crawling across the landscape like a living entity, devouring everything in its path. He saw a figure, standing in the middle of the flames, its silhouette distorted by the fire. This wasn't like any person he had seen before. It was tall, skeletal, and it loomed over the ground like a phantom. As Ethan rushed forward, the figure turned. Its face was nothing, just a hollow mask, nothing human. Yet somehow, it saw him. It grinned. A jagged line formed across its face, like cracks in porcelain. The temperature dropped, the flames flickering as if they were being sucked into the figure's body. The air around Ethan felt thick, suffocating. He gasped for breath, but it felt like the very atmosphere was being burned away. He stumbled backward, clutching his fire axe. There was no way this thing could be human. The figure spoke in a voice that chilled Ethan to the bone. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have answered the call." Frantic, Ethan turned and ran. But as he sprinted toward the truck, the fire seemed to close in on him, pushing him backward. It was as if the very earth beneath his feet was shifting, pulling him into the flames. He ducked inside the truck and floored the gas pedal. The fire raged behind him, but the town seemed untouched, a strange calm hanging over Devil's Point. When he arrived back at the firehouse, his heart pounded in his chest. Sweat slicked his brow as he slammed the truck into park. Briggs was waiting for him at the door, looking eerily calm. "I saw it," Ethan gasped, breathless, eyes wide. "I saw it in the fire. There was something in the flames. It spoke to me." Briggs didn't respond right away. He just stared at Ethan, his eyes cold and unblinking. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You're starting to see the truth, then." Ethan's blood ran cold. "The truth?" The chief turned and gestured for Ethan to follow him into the firehouse's back room. The rest of the men were already gathered there, their faces somber. Briggs spoke softly, but there was no denying the gravity of his words. "This town, it doesn't just burn, son. It feeds. We feed it." Ethan shook his head. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, feed it?" Briggs' voice lowered, thick with age and something far darker. "This firehouse, this station, was built, for one thing, to keep the fires going, to feed the flames of Devil's Point. But it's not just any fire. It's the fire." Ethan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the words. What are you talking about? It's just fires. I'm a fireman. We put out fires. We save people." Briggs smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "That's where you're wrong. We don't save people. We sacrifice them. We burn them. And in return, the fire keeps us safe. It keeps the darkness away." Ethan's legs felt weak. He wanted to run, but the firehouse, with its cold walls and older men, felt like it was closing in on him. Briggs continued, his voice growing darker. "You think those rules were just rules? They were a pact. A bargain made long before you. Came here. And the price? Your soul. Ethan sat in silence, staring at the cracked walls of the firehouse as Briggs' words echoed in his mind. We sacrifice them, and the fire keeps us safe. His heart hammered in his chest, but there was no escape. He knew now that he was trapped, bound by some ancient, horrific agreement. It wasn't just a firehouse, it was a temple of sacrifice. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. But the fires, the people... Briggs raised a hand, cutting him off. It's not just people, son. It's their souls. Every month we burn something personal. That's the first step. The second step is much darker. Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. And what is that second step? The chief's face turned grim. You'll learn soon enough. You don't have a choice now. Later that evening, Ethan watched, his heart sinking, as the firefighters prepared for the first of the month. They gathered in a small, dimly lit room at the back of the firehouse, a place he hadn't noticed before. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, patterns that seemed to dance under the flickering candlelight. Ethan was led to a small table where a single object waited. "A piece of yourself, Cole," Briggs said, his voice unusually solemn. "Your offering." Ethan glanced at the object on the table. It was a small, weathered notebook, one he had kept for years. It contained all his thoughts, his memories, his most intimate reflections. He had written in it since he was a child, and it was the only thing that felt truly his. "Burn it," Briggs said simply. Ethan's pulse quickened. What are you talking about?" "The rules," Briggs said, his eyes cold. "It's how it's always been. We burn something personal, something that matters. We offer it to the fire. If we don't, it comes for us." The older men stood around, their eyes heavy with a blend of resignation and fear. They had done this before. They had given up parts of themselves over and over again. Ethan's hand shook as he picked up the notebook. His mind raced. What was he supposed to do? How could he sacrifice something so personal? He felt the weight of the decision. This wasn't just about a notebook. This was about his soul. As the fire in the center of the room roared to life, Ethan hesitated. For a brief moment, he thought about running. But where would he go? This town was alive with its secrets, and those secrets were darker than he could have ever imagined. He tossed the notebook into the flames. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the fire seemed to surge, the flames growing taller, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. The heat in the room became unbearable, and Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though his very heart was being torn from his body. The other men stood motionless, watching the fire in eerie silence. And then, Ethan saw it. A figure. One. That was not a man, not a woman, but a distorted entity of smoke and flame, writhing in the fire. The figure reached out toward him, its tendrils of smoke stretching like fingers. "It has begun," the chief murmured. That night, sleep eluded Ethan. The weight of the ritual still lingered in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't shake the image of the burning figure in the flames. As the hours passed, a strange, unsettling noise filled the firehouse. A soft scratching, like claws dragging against the walls. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he slowly stood up, the cold air wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. He walked toward the source of the noise, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He reached the back door, and that's when he saw it. A shadow. It stood outside, just beyond the reach of the firelight, watching him. The shadow was massive, shifting, with no clear form. It seemed to distort the very air around it, warping reality. A voice came from the darkness, low and guttural. "You are ours now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. but he stood frozen, unable to move. The shadow seemed to grow, towering above him, and then, suddenly, it was gone, vanished into the night. The next morning, Ethan woke up to a strange feeling. There was no warmth in the air, no comfort in the firehouse. He could feel the presence of the shadow still lurking, watching him. His hand instinctively went to his chest, where the pain from the ritual had left an unsettling mark. A faint, almost symbolic burn. It was the mark of the pact, a brand that would remain with him until his death. The firehouse felt different now. The other men didn't speak, but their eyes held a mix of pity and dread. Briggs approached him later that day, his expression unreadable. "You can leave, if you want," he said. "But you won't escape. Not from the fire. Not from the deal." Ethan wanted to run. He wanted to escape the nightmare that had become his life. But the strange, terrifying pull of the firehouse and the town kept him rooted to the spot. He couldn't leave. The fire wouldn't let him. That evening, the worst call of all came in. A child was trapped in a burning house on the outskirts of Devil's Point. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A child? Again? Ignoring the warning signs, ignoring the rules, he rushed to the scene. The house was engulfed in flames, its windows glowing like eyes in the dark. As Ethan rushed inside, the fire seemed to come alive again, pushing back against him, pushing him toward a darker fate. He saw a figure through the smoke, the same shadow he had seen before. It was standing in the corner of the room, its glowing eyes locked onto him. The child was there, trapped in the flames, but the shadow was holding him back, keeping him from saving the boy. Ethan screamed, but the figure remained still, watching him with an almost pleased expression. Ethan couldn't escape the feeling that he was losing control. The firehouse had a life of its own, a creeping presence that seemed to follow him every step he took. The rules, the rituals, the whispers in the dark, it all felt like an inescapable web closing around him. That night, as Ethan walked the corridors of the firehouse, he heard it again. The faint scratching, the sound of something watching him. He turned a corner and froze. There, standing in the middle of the hallway, was an image so horrifying it made his stomach churn. It was a child, no older than 5, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The child's skin was burned, but not like someone who had been in a fire. This was something else, something unnatural. The child's mouth opened, but no sound came out, just the soft creak of bones shifting beneath the skin. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the firehouse. Ethan stumbled backward, his heart racing. He could feel the cold sweat on his brow as he gasped for air. He had seen that child before, in the flames, in the vision from the night of the ritual. But now, it was real, and it was here. The following morning, Ethan couldn't shake the image of the burned child from his mind. He went to Briggs, hoping for answers, but what he learned only deepened the terror. Briggs's face was pale, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. He didn't need to ask what had happened. The look on Ethan's face said it all. "You saw him, didn't you?" Briggs asked, his voice low. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. "That's it," Briggs said, his hands trembling. "The child you saw? It's the soul of someone who was offered as a sacrifice." Ethan's stomach lurched. "Sacrifice?" Briggs grimaced. "Yes, that child was never meant to live. That's what happens when the fire takes someone. They're twisted, warped, burned into something that can never rest." Ethan's mind reeled. "But why? Why are you doing this?" Briggs sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because we have no choice. The fire demands it. It's ancient, far older than this town. When we burn something personal, when we feed the fire, it keeps the town safe. It keeps us safe. Ethan felt the weight of the words, the rules, the rituals. All of it was to keep the fire at bay. But who was the fire really protecting? And at what cost? That night, Ethan received another call. A fire, this time in the woods. The familiar dread gripped him as he put on his gear, preparing to face whatever nightmare awaited him. The firehouse was eerily quiet as he left, the silence thick with the weight of the unknown. When he arrived at the scene, the trees were ablaze, casting an orange glow over the surrounding darkness. The fire danced and crackled as though alive, its heat suffocating. In the distance, he saw the shadow again, the dark figure, its outline barely visible against the flames. It was standing at the edge of the fire, watching him with its glowing eyes. The flames seemed to reach out toward him, almost as if they were trying to pull him in. Ethan felt the familiar cold chill creeping up his spine as he rushed toward the source of the fire. And then, there it was, a figure in the flames. The same distorted, twisted shape he had seen before, but this time it was closer, its tendrils of smoke swirling around him like a living entity. He gripped the child in, his arms feeling its weight grow heavier with every step. The flames roared louder as the shadow moved closer, its eyes glowing brighter, its form shifting like a monster hungry for its next victim. Ethan barely made it out of the fire with the child in tow. The flames seemed to follow him, pushing him toward the edge of the woods. But the closer he got to the town, the more the fire receded. He collapsed on the ground, panting for breath, as the child lay motionless in his arms. For a moment, he thought he had escaped. But the darkness in the firehouse wasn't finished with him yet. The child's body stirred, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Its eyes snapped open, burning with a sickly yellow glow. Ethan recoiled, but it was too late. The child's mouth stretched unnaturally wide, letting out a high-pitched scream that tore through the air. The fire around them flared up once more, engulfing everything in its path. The shadows closed in, swirling around Ethan as he struggled to breathe. He was surrounded, trapped once again by the very thing he had been trying to escape. Back at the firehouse, Ethan found the others waiting, standing around the fire with a knowing look in their eyes. The child was gone, consumed by the flames, but the toll it had taken on Ethan was evident. "You did well," Briggs said, his voice heavy with resignation. Ethan's mind raced. Did well? How could he have done well? He had saved the child, only to watch it burn, to see its soul consumed by the fire. "It's the way it has always been," Briggs continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "The fire gives, but it always takes. And now, it will come for you." Ethan's heart sank. The price had been paid, but it wasn't over. As the days passed, Ethan grew more and more restless. The firehouse felt like a prison, its walls closing in on him. The figure in the flames, the burned child, the shadow that haunted him, it was all too much to bear. Then, one night, the fire spoke to him. It was a voice, low and guttural, echoing in his ears. "You are ours now." Ethan knew what he had to do. He could no longer be a part of this. He couldn't let the fire claim any more souls. He had to destroy it. But how? The fire was ancient, untouchable, its power beyond understanding. As Ethan prepared for the final confrontation, the fire in the distance began to burn brighter. The shadow emerged once more, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. Ethan steeled, himself, for what was to come. The battle between him and the firehouse, the battle between life and death, was just beginning. Ethan stood at the threshold of the firehouse, feeling its ominous pull, a force he couldn't deny. It had claimed so much already. So many souls, so many lives, and now it wanted his. But Ethan was determined to stop it, no matter the cost. He had learned everything he could from the firehouse's twisted rituals and ancient rules. But there was one truth he couldn't ignore. The fire demanded a price, and it was always hungry. The walls of the firehouse seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Every step he took felt like walking on the edge of a precipice. But Ethan couldn't turn back now. The others, the elderly firefighters who had once been his mentors, were nowhere to be found. It was as if they had vanished into the shadows, leaving him to face the fire alone. The air inside the firehouse grew colder as Ethan walked deeper into its bowels. He could hear the flames crackling in the distance, their hunger roaring louder with each passing second. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled his nostrils. He reached the heart of the firehouse, where the enormous fire pit stood, its flames swirling as though alive, reaching up toward the rafters. And there, standing in the midst of the fire, was the figure, the shadow that had haunted him since his first night in Devil's Point. It was no longer just a silhouette. The figure had a form now, a humanoid shape, cloaked in shadows and smoke. Its face was hidden in the flickering light, but Ethan could feel its eyes on him, watching, waiting. He had heard the stories, the town's history of fire worship, the sacrifices made to appease the flames, and the ancient presence that had long claimed the town as its own. But this was more than a story now. This was his reality. The figure spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl. You cannot escape. You never could. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. I won't let you take anyone else. Not tonight. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused. You think you have a choice. Ethan's body trembled, but he didn't back down. He clenched his fists, focusing all his energy on one goal: to destroy this malevolent force, to free the town from its grip once and for all. But the fire had other plans. The flames rose higher, as though feeding off his fear. They crackled and roared, twisting into unnatural shapes, their heat unbearable. Ethan could feel the temperature rise, his skin prickling with the intensity of the fire's heat. Every fire needs fuel, the figure hissed, stepping closer, its shape growing clearer in the flames. And every soul must be sacrificed. Ethan was trapped. The firehouse was alive, breathing, pushing him closer to the edge. But then, he remembered something. The ritual. The burning of something personal. What if that was the key to breaking the cycle? What if he could sacrifice his own past, sever the connection between the fire and the town, once and for all? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph of his family. The last memory he had of his life before Devil's Point. He could feel the weight of the decision. Could he really let go of his past? Could he destroy the last piece of his humanity? The figure watched him closely, its dark eyes gleaming with malicious delight. Do it, Ethan. Burn it. Become part of the fire. With a shaky breath, Ethan stepped forward. His hands trembled as he held the photograph above the flames, staring into the fire's wild eyes. Would this work? Would this break the curse? Without another thought, he tossed the photograph into the fire. The flames seemed to react instantly, flaring up in a violent explosion of heat and light. The fire grew, becoming more chaotic, as if it were alive, consuming everything in its path. But Ethan didn't flinch. He watched as the picture of his family was consumed by the flames, their faces distorted and twisted by the fire's power. For a moment, nothing happened. The firehouse seemed to freeze in time, the air thick with tension. And then, the figure lunged at him. It moved so quickly that Ethan had no time to react. The figure's shadowy arms reached out, grabbing him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The heat of the flames intensified, searing his skin as the figure's cold, skeletal fingers tightened around his neck. "You are mine now," the figure growled, its voice filled with fury. "You cannot escape. You are part of the fire." But just as Ethan felt the life being squeezed out of him, something changed. The flames began to waver, their intensity faltering. The sacrifice had worked, but not in the way he had expected. The figure's grip loosened, and it staggered back, as if something was draining its power. Ethan gasped for air, his heart racing as he stumbled to his feet. The fire began to flicker, its grip on the firehouse weakening. Something had broken, and the figure seemed to be unraveling, its shadowy form disintegrating into the flames. "No," the figure whispered, its voice filled with disbelief. "No, this cannot happen." Ethan didn't know how long he had, but he knew this was his chance. With every ounce of strength left in his body, he rushed toward the fire pit, determined to end it once and for all. The flames surged, but now they felt different, weakened, almost desperate. Ethan reached into the pit, feeling the heat sear his hand, but he didn't pull back. This was it. He had to stop the cycle. He had to destroy the fire from within. As he plunged his hand into the fire, there was a deafening roar, a sound that rattled the very walls of the firehouse. Ethan screamed as the fire consumed his arm, but he held on, his mind focused on one goal: to end the curse. The figure's form collapsed completely, fading into nothingness. And then, silence. Ethan lay on the cold floor of the firehouse, his body burned, his strength fading. The fire had died down, leaving only smoldering ashes in its wake. But the town of Devil's Point was still, eerily silent. The oppressive darkness that had hung over the town for so long seemed to lift, but Ethan could still hear the faint crackling of distant flames in his mind. He had won, but at a terrible cost. The firehouse was gone, but so was everything he had once known. Devil's Point was still there, a town haunted by its past. As Ethan struggled to rise, he knew there was no going back. He had given everything to break the curse. But now, he was alone, and the fire had left its mark on him, in ways he could never erase. The darkness of the night was almost suffocating as Emily stumbled out of the bar, her friends' laughter fading into the distance. The neon lights of the street cast an eerie glow on her surroundings. She wasn't sure if she was still drunk, or just exhausted from the long night of celebrating, but something felt off. Her phone was dead, and she couldn't remember where she'd parked. The city felt colder tonight. Its usual hum of activity stilled as if holding its breath. She tried to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at her, chalking it up to the alcohol and her own overactive imagination. But as she walked further down the street, her footsteps began to echo loudly in the silence, each step a little too heavy, a little too far apart. "Hello," she called out, more out of instinct than a real desire for an answer. The wind howled suddenly, making the shadows of the alleyways stretch in unnatural directions. Emily quickened her pace, pulling her jacket tighter around her. That's when she heard it. A voice, faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. "Emily." She froze in place, heart hammering against her ribs. There was no one around. She looked over her shoulder, expecting to see one of her friends. But the street was empty. No cars, no people, just the harsh, flickering streetlights. It was nothing. She forced herself to keep walking, but that voice echoed in her mind like a heartbeat. Emily's unease grew as she neared her apartment building. The street seemed to close in on her, the dim lights casting long, distorted shadows. She turned a corner, and suddenly the chill in the air became unbearable, as if the world around her had shifted. A flicker of movement caught her eye. She stopped dead in her tracks. In the reflection of the window across the street, she saw herself standing there, but something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't quite her own. The woman in the glass stared back at her, her face twisted in a grotesque smile. She didn't look like Emily at all. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her grin stretched far too far, making her appear monstrous. The smile was not one of happiness or joy, but of something darker, something malicious. Emily gasped, stumbling back. But when she looked again, the reflection was normal. Her own face, confused and pale, stared back at her. She blinked rapidly, trying to shake the image from her mind. It had to be the alcohol, the exhaustion. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. She reached her apartment, trying to push the image from her mind, but the voice came again, clearer this time. Emily. It was there, just behind her thoughts, almost a whisper but sharp as a blade. Her heart skipped a beat. That night, as she lay in bed, the darkness in her apartment felt different, more oppressive, more alive. Emily tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. The shadows in the corners of her room seemed to stretch, move, and shift with a mind of their own. The silence was maddening. It felt as though she wasn't alone, but she couldn't figure out where the feeling was coming from. Suddenly there was a loud crack, the sound of something heavy falling in the next room. Emily shot up in bed, heart racing. She cautiously got up, her bare feet sinking into the cold floor as she approached the source of the noise. Her breath hitched as she entered the living room. The bookshelf, usually sturdy, had toppled over, scattering books across the floor. But there was no way it should have fallen. She hadn't touched it in days. As she moved to pick up the books, she saw something. A shadow, just at the edge of her vision, moving quickly across the room. She whipped her head around, but nothing was there. The chill returned, crawling up her spine. Her skin prickled, as if every hair on her body was standing at attention. She backed away from the bookshelf, her pulse racing. The air was thick, stifling, like it had been sucked out of the room. She couldn't breathe. This is just the stress, she told herself. You're just imagining things. But then, a voice, as clear as day, whispered directly in her ear. You can't escape. Her entire body froze. Her throat tightened, and the room seemed to spin around her. The lights flickered, and Emily stumbled back toward her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. She collapsed onto the bed, her heart racing. She tried to steady her breathing, but the voice, it wouldn't stop. It kept whispering in the darkness, urging her to do things she didn't understand. The floor beneath her seemed to shift, and a low growl echoed through the walls, vibrating deep into her bones. Over the next few days, things got worse. Emily's once ordinary life was consumed by the growing sense of terror. The strange occurrences began to pile up, objects moving on their own, chilling drafts in her apartment, strange symbols appearing on the walls when she wasn't looking. She started seeing things that weren't there, faces in mirrors that weren't her own, shadowy figures lurking at the edge of her vision, voices that weren't just in her mind. The line between reality and nightmare blurred with each passing day. And the voice, it was always there, taunting her, whispering dark secrets, urging her to do things she could never bring herself to act on. One night, she awoke to find her bed soaked in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was freezing cold, even though the heater was running. She sat up slowly, her limbs heavy and sluggish. Her eyes darted to the door, where a figure stood, completely still in the darkness. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but Emily knew somehow that it was watching her. It stepped forward, slowly, its feet dragging along the floor with an unnatural slowness. She tried to scream, but no sound came from her throat. Panic surged through her as she backed away from the figure, feeling the coldness press in closer. The figure didn't move, but its presence filled the room, suffocating her. "It's here," the voice whispered again. "You're mine now." Days blurred into each other as Emily struggled to understand what was happening. Every night, the fear worsened. The voice grew more insistent, whispering in her ear, in her thoughts, urging her to do things she didn't understand. It wasn't just the voice anymore. She could feel the presence, like a weight on her chest when she tried to sleep. The air in her apartment was thick with it, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. One evening, after a particularly restless day, Emily found herself sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She thought she saw a figure pass by the window outside, a shadow, barely noticeable but unmistakable. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Heart racing, she rushed to the window, flinging it open. The street was empty. Just as she was about to turn away, something caught her eye. A figure standing at the far end of the street, shrouded in darkness. It didn't move, just stood there, watching her. "Who is that?" she muttered, her voice trembling. No answer. The figure remained motionless, almost as if daring her to approach. Every instinct in her body screamed to stay inside, but something was pushing her toward it. She couldn't explain it, an inexplicable urge to confront whatever that was. It was like a magnetic pull, urging her to move toward it, to uncover its secrets. She hesitated. Then, with a mixture of fear and curiosity, she closed the window and backed away. That night, Emily couldn't sleep again. The voice in her head kept repeating things, unclear words, fragments of sentences she couldn't understand. Then, as if it were a natural extension of the haunting, she heard scratching on the bathroom mirror, soft at first, like a fingernail running across glass. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just the house settling. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic. Finally, she could take no more. She rushed into the bathroom, the light flickering above her. The mirror, usually a clean reflection of her own face, was now covered in a layer of fog. But there was something different this time. As she wiped away the mist, the words appeared in the mirror, scrawled in jagged letters. "I know you, Emily." Her blood ran cold. It was written in a way that seemed almost alive. She wiped at the fog again, but the message didn't disappear. She backed away, panicking, her heart hammering in her chest. "I know you, Emily." The words echoed in her mind like a chant. Something wasn't right. She wasn't alone in this apartment, and whoever or whatever was watching her knew more than she ever thought possible. The next morning, Emily's nerves were on edge. She felt like she was living in a waking nightmare, unable to trust her own senses. Her work, her relationships, everything seemed distant and out of focus. It was like she was living in a parallel world, where the rules of reality didn't apply. That night, as she prepared for bed, the air grew thick again, suffocating. The apartment felt heavy with an unseen presence. Her eyes flicked nervously to the corner of the room. There, standing as though waiting for her, was the shadowy figure. It was taller now, its form more defined, like it had been gaining strength with each passing day. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. Her body froze, unable to move, paralyzed by fear. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she knew the answer. The voice in her head told her it would be no use to ask. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it reached toward her, its hand a twisted silhouette in the dim light. Emily stumbled backward, trying to run, but her legs refused to cooperate. She could feel the cold air swirling around her, closing in, trapping her. "Emily," the figure whispered, the voice not her own, but deep, ancient, and chilling. Days passed, but the horrors only escalated. Emily began to see things. Flashes of scenes that couldn't be real. People standing at windows she had never seen. Shapes moving in mirrors. Reflections that didn't match her movements. It was as if reality itself was splintering, breaking apart like shards of glass. Her co-workers noticed her disheveled appearance, her distracted behavior. Her best friend Megan suggested she take some time off to rest, but Emily couldn't. She knew she couldn't. Not with the figure growing stronger, its presence becoming more menacing. It wasn't just a figure anymore. It was a force, a being that seemed to be feeding off her fear, growing stronger as she fell deeper into her panic. The voice in her head kept whispering, "You can't escape." It was maddening. Emily's desperation grew as she tried to find a way to escape the apartment, the building, the city, but every attempt was met with failure. No matter where she went, the figure followed. And the presence? It grew stronger, always waiting, always watching. Emily had tried everything to rid herself of the haunting. She'd gone to a psychic, performed rituals she found online, even tried to destroy the mirrors in her apartment, but nothing worked. The shadow, the voice, and the presence were relentless, and Emily could no longer tell what was real. On the night of the full moon, the voice urged her to follow it. There was no choice left. Emily didn't want to. Her fear had consumed her, but something deep within her drove her to make a decision. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen, the only weapon she could think of, and slowly made her way toward the dark corner of her apartment where the figure always appeared. As she approached, the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to press in tighter. The figure was waiting, standing tall, motionless. It didn't speak this time. It only watched, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You are mine," the voice whispered in her mind as she held the knife before her. In a moment of clarity, Emily knew what she had to do. She had to face this thing, this force that had been haunting her. She stepped forward, trembling but determined. Days blurred together in Emily's mind as the horrors continued to escalate. The figure no longer just haunted her apartment. Its presence spread throughout her life, creeping into every waking moment. It was in the reflections of windows as she walked down the street, in the faces of strangers she passed, and even in the flickering of lights above her as she sat at her desk at work. Everywhere she looked, there was an underlying sense of malevolent eyes watching her, tracking her every move. The voice in her mind grew stronger. "You can't escape, Emily. You're mine." Her nights were filled with restless dreams that felt more like memories than imagination. She dreamed of the figure, only this time, it wasn't just standing in the corner of her apartment. It was in the very walls, seeping through the cracks, whispering to her in a language she couldn't understand. It beckoned her to join it, to give in to its pull. The lines between the dream world and reality started to blur. Emily could no longer tell if the whispers were coming from the shadows or from her own mind. She felt like she was losing herself, slipping into something darker. Every day felt like a fight for survival. But there was no escape, no refuge. Emily's mental state began to deteriorate as she became more isolated. Her co-workers noticed her disheveled appearance, the dark bags under her eyes, and the fear that she tried so desperately to hide. Megan, her closest friend, became worried and urged Emily to see a doctor or even check herself into a hospital. But Emily couldn't. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Megan. The presence was too strong, too pervasive. She couldn't shake the feeling that no matter where she went, it would follow her. So, she continued to push everyone away, including her best friend, who eventually gave up on trying to help her. One day, Emily came home after a particularly grueling workday to find her apartment eerily silent. The lights were flickering again, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. As she stepped inside, she felt the cold air rush over her. She wasn't alone. The figure was back, but this time it was different. It was more solid, its features more defined, its presence almost physical. Its glowing eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, it spoke. Not in her mind, but aloud. "Come with me, Emily," it said, its voice deep and resonant, sending chills down her spine. Emily's heart raced. She could feel her pulse thundering in her ears, her breath shallow and panicked. For a moment, she froze. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, to escape, but she couldn't. Her legs wouldn't move. She was trapped in place by the figure's intense gaze. "You're not real," she whispered through trembling lips. But deep down, she knew it was a lie. The figure was real, and so was the power it had over her. Slowly, as if compelled by some unseen force, Emily took a step forward. Her fear was palpable, but there was something else too. An odd pull that drew her in. She didn't understand it, but she felt like she had no choice but to obey. The figure extended its hand, and though every instinct screamed for her to run, she reached out and took it. The moment her hand made contact with the cold, unyielding skin of the figure, the world around her seemed to collapse. The apartment disappeared, replaced by an endless void, a swirling darkness that stretched on forever. The figure stood before her, towering and ominous, its eyes glowing even brighter now. "This is where you belong," it said, and its voice reverberated in her very bones. Suddenly, Emily was no longer in her apartment. She was in a dark, suffocating space, surrounded by shadows that writhed and twisted. The air was thick with something vile, the temperature plummeting to an unbearable chill. The figure was no longer beside her. It was all around her, in the shadows, in the whispers that filled her ears. "This is where we are," the figure's voice echoed, distorted and omnipresent. "This is where we will remain." Emily could barely breathe. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the shadows pressed in, their tendrils reaching for her. She stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go, no escape. Panic overtook her as she looked around, her mind reeling. The figure was gone, but the oppressive presence remained. She could hear whispers, cold and mocking, coming from every direction. She wasn't alone. Something else was in this place. Something ancient, something hungry. Her sense of reality shattered completely. Emily no longer knew what was real and what was a manifestation of her fear. The whispers in the shadows grew louder, urging her to give in, to surrender to the darkness that had consumed her. The figure's presence loomed in every corner of this strange realm, its eyes always watching, waiting. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. Every movement was sluggish, slow, as if the very air was holding her back. "You are mine now." The figure's voice echoed in her mind, and she knew in that moment that it was true. She was trapped. Trapped in this nightmare. Trapped in the shadows. There was no escape, no light at the end of the tunnel. Just darkness, and the ever-present feeling that the figure was growing stronger, feeding off her fear. Just as Emily's sanity began to crumble, there was a sudden shift. The shadows seemed to pull away, the oppressive darkness lifting for a moment. She found herself back in her apartment, gasping for breath, her body drenched in sweat. The figure was gone, but its presence lingered. It wasn't over. The apartment was unchanged, but Emily knew deep down that the figure was still there, somewhere, watching her. She wasn't free. She would never be free, and the figure would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to slip again. Days pass, but the sense of impending doom never leaves Emily. Her waking moments are filled with an overwhelming feeling that the figure is always near, watching, waiting for her to slip once again. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a light, feels like an ominous signal of its approach. The darkness within her apartment seems to deepen, the shadows longer, as if the walls themselves are closing in. She attempts to return to normalcy, but it's impossible. Her friends, once a source of comfort, have become distant. Megan, her best friend, tries to reach out, but Emily can't bear to face her. She can't risk dragging Megan into the madness that's swallowing her whole. The isolation only amplifies her fear. The only voice she hears now is the figure's, and it's growing stronger, more demanding. Come to me, Emily. You're mine. You always were. She tries to silence the voice, but it reverberates in her skull, a constant reminder of the force she can't escape. The longer she resists, the more relentless the figure becomes. She starts to see it more clearly now. Not just in the dark corners of her apartment, but in the reflections of glass, in the shadows of every room, even in her peripheral vision. Its eyes seem to follow her, burning with a hunger that never dims. Desperate for relief, Emily starts researching anything that could explain the events happening to her. She scours the internet for stories of hauntings, curses, anything that might help her understand what she's dealing with. Most of the stories she finds are eerily similar. Figures that appear out of nowhere, voices that invade your mind, a sense of being marked by something evil. One night, while searching through an old book she finds in the back of a dusty bookstore, Emily stumbles upon a description that shakes her to her core. The figure is not merely a spirit, but an ancient entity, a being that feeds on fear and feeds on those it marks. It is called the Shadow, and once it sets its eyes on you, there is no escape. The only way to rid yourself of it is to confront it head-on. But doing so will come with an unspeakable price. The fear of facing this entity head-on paralyzes her, but the urge to fight back, to regain control of her life, is stronger. She knows what she must do, but the path forward feels increasingly uncertain. How can she defeat something that has already taken so much from her? How can she face the darkness she's been running from for so long? The figure becomes more tangible. Now, its presence more physical than ever before. It no longer stays hidden in the shadows. Instead, it moves, watches, and approaches. One evening, Emily comes home from work to find her apartment door ajar. The hair on the back of her neck stands on end. She never leaves her door open. Inside, the lights flicker erratically, and she hears the unmistakable sound of breathing. Heavy, labored breathing. She steps inside, her heart pounding. The figure is standing in the middle of the room, no longer a mere shadow. It is a twisted, dark silhouette with glowing red eyes, staring directly at her. The air grows colder, and she feels as though her chest is being crushed under the weight of its presence. "I'm here," it says in a voice that is both guttural and sweet, like the sound of nails scraping against a chalkboard. Emily can barely move, her limbs frozen by terror. The entity steps closer, its cold fingers brushing her skin. She recoils in horror, but the figure just smiles. A grotesque smile that seems to stretch too wide for its face. "You belong to me, Emily. It's time to face the truth." Emily retreats to her bedroom, trembling with fear. Her breath comes in ragged gasps, her mind spinning. She can't take it anymore. She can't live like this, constantly running from something that is always a step ahead. She realizes with sudden clarity, that she has to confront the figure. Face it, no matter the cost. It's the only way she will be free. But there's a problem. Every time she tries to prepare herself to fight, the fear becomes too much. It paralyzes her. The figure knows this and uses it against her, tormenting her with its whispers, its presence, its ever-watching gaze. Determined, Emily begins preparing herself for the inevitable confrontation. She locks the door, barricades the windows, and sets the room to as dark as possible, hoping to force the figure into full view. She spends the next few hours meditating, trying to gather strength, trying to make peace with the fear that has taken hold of her life. It's now or never. That night, as Emily sits in the center of the room, she feels a sudden drop in temperature. The figure is there, in the darkness, its eyes glowing with hunger. She rises to face it, her knees weak, but her resolve firm. "I know what you are," she says, her voice shaking. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The figure tilts its head, almost curious. "You can't escape me, Emily. You can't escape the fear inside you." With a surge of willpower, Emily steps forward, confronting the figure head-on. The room seems to spin as the darkness intensifies, but Emily stands her ground. She won't let it win. The figure reaches out, its cold fingers brushing her face, but before it can make contact, Emily grabs a piece of the ancient book she had found earlier. It's said that the key to banishing the shadow is to force it into the light. Literally. She lights a match and holds it up, casting a flickering glow around the room. The figure shrieks in agony, its form distorting and writhing in the light. With a final desperate push, Emily throws the book toward the figure, a wave of energy washing over her. The room goes black. The whispers stop. And then, silence. When Emily opens her eyes, she finds herself lying on the floor of her apartment. The figure is gone. The shadows are gone. The air feels lighter. She feels free. But as she looks around the room, she notices something chilling. The walls, though, now bathed in daylight, seem to pulse. The whispers have stopped, but the sensation of being watched remains. The figure is gone. But was it truly defeated? Emily can't shake the feeling that the shadow is still there, lingering just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to return. And so, the cycle begins again. She will never truly be free. The air feels lighter. Emily knows this, but the weight of what she has just endured lingers. She awakens in the same apartment, the one that had once been her sanctuary, now transformed into a prison. The figure is gone. At least she thinks it is. But every time she turns a corner, every shadow that crosses her vision, she feels its presence. A shiver crawls up her spine as she forces herself to breathe, to remain calm. She thought she had defeated it. But when the world around her grows eerily silent, she begins to wonder if the battle was ever truly won. Her reflection in the mirror shows the toll of her ordeal. She's thin, pale, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights spent fighting unseen horrors. Emily knows she should be relieved that the figure is no longer haunting her, but the feeling of dread continues to gnaw at her. Is the entity truly gone, or has it left something worse in its wake? The nightmares begin again, more vivid this time, more intense. Emily dreams of the figure, but now it's not just a shadow. It's a corporeal being, a terrifying, distorted creature that seems to pulse with darkness. She wakes up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure's voice is still echoing in her mind, whispering its cryptic words, reminding her that she is never truly free. It comes back in waves, in the creaking of the floorboards, the chill that sweeps through the room, the flicker of the lights. It moves in the corners of her vision, always just out of sight, but ever present. Emily tries to ignore it. She tries to convince herself that it's her mind playing tricks on her, that the entity is gone for good. But deep down, she knows better. The figure returns, stronger and more persistent than before. It starts appearing more clearly now, its form materializing in the shadows of the apartment, creeping closer as the days go by. Emily tries to scream, but her voice fails her. She tries to run, but her feet feel like they're made of lead, trapped in the nightmare she can't escape. The days pass. Emily begins to question whether she's truly in control anymore. Her apartment, once a place of comfort, now feels like a cage. She can't shake the feeling that the walls are closing in, and with each passing moment, her perception of reality fractures more and more. She begins to notice things. Small things. At first, that don't quite add up. A picture frame tilted slightly. A chair moved out of place. Objects she's certain she didn't touch are now shifted around her apartment. Her mind races, but she can't remember doing any of it. Could the figure be controlling her movements when she's not aware? Or is she losing her grip on reality? Her exhaustion deepens. Emily can't tell if she's still dreaming or awake anymore. The lines blur between the waking world and the nightmare, and she struggles to hold on to her sanity. Even when she tries to call Megan for help, the phone calls become distorted, full of static and whispers that sound eerily like the figure. Megan's voice becomes distant, as if Emily is losing her ability to connect to the real world. Frantic, Emily tries to reach out to the outside world for help. She seeks the assistance of a paranormal expert, someone who might have the answers she needs. But when she meets with the expert, the man looks at her with pity in his eyes, as if he already knows the truth she hasn't yet accepted. He tells her something she didn't want to hear. Once you've crossed paths with the shadow, there is no escape. The darkness follows you, eats at your soul. It will never leave you. He tells her that the only way to truly break free from it is to confront it once more, to banish it with an act of unimaginable willpower. But he warns her that the cost will be high, and that victory may come at the price of her very soul. Emily returns to her apartment, torn. She knows what she has to do, but the idea of confronting the entity one final time fills her with terror. She has already given so much, and now she must face the darkness again. This time, though, she has something the figure does not: knowledge. She understands the rules of its power. She knows its weaknesses. The entity feeds on fear, but it can be outsmarted. It can be driven away if she can resist its pull. With no other options left, Emily prepares herself for the final confrontation. She closes all the windows, locks the door, and sets the room as dark as possible. Her breath comes in shallow gasps, but she steadies herself. The figure will come. It always does, but this time she will be ready. It doesn't take long. The room grows colder, and she hears the familiar sound of breathing. The figure appears, emerging from the shadows. Its form is more grotesque than before, twisted and contorted, its eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. "You cannot defeat me, Emily," it says, its voice a hiss that seems to come from all directions at once. "You will always belong to me." But Emily stands tall, her face set in determination. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." With a newfound strength, Emily takes the book she found earlier, the one with the knowledge of how to banish the shadow, and opens it. She speaks the incantation aloud, each word heavy with meaning. As the final words leave her mouth, the room trembles. The figure shrieks, its form twisting in agony as the light from the candle she set on the table grows brighter, engulfing the room in a blinding glow. The room goes silent. The figure is gone. But Emily knows that the battle may never truly be over. The darkness may be gone for now, but the scars it left will last a lifetime. She wonders if she will ever be free of it, or if she will always be haunted by the presence of something that will never let go. She stands in the middle of her apartment, looking at the now quiet room. The flickering lights, the shadowed corners, they seem less threatening now. But she knows deep down that she will never be the same. She has faced the shadow, and while it may have been defeated, its mark remains. Emily wakes up to a world that seems quieter, more peaceful, yet tainted by the remnants of her ordeal. The entity, the figure, the whispers, they seem distant now, like an echo fading in the wind. She should feel relieved, but instead, there is a lingering unease. It's as if the victory was too easy, too final. She knows better than to believe that anything in her life could return to normal after everything she's been through. The days after the final confrontation are clouded with a deep sense of exhaustion. Her body aches as though she has fought a war. Her mind races through the events of the past weeks, replaying the final moments when she stood firm and banished the figure from her apartment. But there is something still wrong. There's a low hum in the back of her mind, a whisper she can't quite ignore. She tries to resume her daily life. She calls Megan again, her voice shaky but relieved. They talk briefly, and Megan seems to be doing well. But Emily notices something strange. The words feel distant. The connection feels colder than it should, like there's a wall between them. Despite her best efforts to move on, the nightmares return. Emily wakes in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. She's standing in the middle of a dark forest, the trees around her twisting into grotesque shapes. The figure is there too, its shadowy form moving among the trees, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. Every night it gets worse. The dreams are no longer just dreams. They are becoming memories, as though she's reliving moments from her past encounters with the entity. She wakes up every morning feeling exhausted, her nerves frayed from the lack of sleep. She tries to take control, but no matter how many times she tries to shake off the feeling of impending doom, it never fully fades. There's a sensation of being watched, an unshakable feeling that the figure is still there, lurking in the periphery of her life. The nightmares aren't the only signs of the creeping terror that continues to haunt Emily. The world around her begins to unravel in small, unsettling ways. She starts to notice things shifting in her apartment, objects displaced, doors creaking open on their own. She's sure she locked everything, but now she's uncertain of her own actions. One evening, after another long day of trying to ignore the growing dread in her chest, Emily catches a glimpse of something in the reflection of a window. It's the figure, standing right behind her. She spins around, but there's no one there. Her heart races, and she frantically checks every corner of the apartment, but nothing is out of place. The figure has disappeared, but she knows it's still with her. Her grip on reality starts to loosen. She begins to question whether she's truly free, or if she's simply deluding herself into thinking that the battle has ended. Desperate for answers, Emily contacts the paranormal expert she met earlier, the one who had warned her about the impossible nature of truly escaping the shadow. She seeks guidance, hoping that he has some advice on how to deal with the aftermath. When they meet, the expert's face is grim. His eyes are full of pity, and he doesn't offer any comfort. "You never truly banished it, Emily," he tells her softly. "It's never gone. It's not something that can be eradicated. You were merely allowed to live, for now. The shadow feeds on the mind, the soul, and the fear it plants within. It doesn't need a physical body to remain in your life." The expert warns her that the figure can still return when she least expects it. It will always be lurking, waiting for the right moment to re-enter her life. No matter what she does, Emily will always be at risk of the figure returning, stronger than ever. This conversation shakes Emily to her core. She had hoped that she was free, that she had somehow defeated it, but now she realizes the truth. The entity had merely bided its time. As the days go on, the figure returns once again. But this time, it's not just in her dreams. It materializes in her apartment, its form darker and more twisted than before. Emily's heart races, but she stands her ground. "I know what you are," she whispers, her voice trembling. "You can't break me anymore." The figure's face twists into a grotesque smile. "You can never escape me, Emily. You are mine." But Emily doesn't give in. She has learned from the past. She closes her eyes and focuses all her energy, pushing away the fear that it feeds on. She refuses to let the entity claim her. Her thoughts are her own. She will not let it take them. For a moment, it seems as though the figure is weakening. Its form flickers, like a shadow being blown by the wind. It lets out an otherworldly shriek, but Emily stands firm, concentrating on the feeling of control that she has over her own mind. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanishes. The room falls silent once more. After the last confrontation, Emily feels different. She knows she has won this round, but the victory feels hollow. The figure is gone, but a part of her understands that it is only temporary. The shadow will always be there, lurking in the background, waiting for the next crack in her mind, the next opportunity to strike. The real victory, Emily realizes, is not in the defeat of the entity, but in her refusal to let it control her. She can't erase the terror or the aftermath, but she can control how she reacts. As she sits in her apartment, looking out at the darkened city, Emily feels a strange peace wash over her. She has survived, but she knows this peace is fragile, and the darkness may return someday when she least expects it. For now, though, she can breathe. And that, in itself, is enough.